we've had from the government and the affirmative team today is what I like to say a magic wand policy, right? There's a policy which is so amazing. It solves literally every problem you throw at it, right? The McCain-Feingold Act is the best piece of legislation ever. It stops all these particular problems. I mean, that's of course quite untrue, and I think what we really need to see from the negative team is not just that the McCain-Feingold Act has a provision to solve it. We need to see why that provision solves the problems that we've been talking about. And that's what we think we've given you today. We've given you a couple of very plausible, relatively logical reasons as to why a cap specifically doesn't increase equality. In fact, it undermines it. We've showed you why a cap will increase the level of media interference in campaigns and will change the way politicians behave. We're not going to admit to you today that there are problems already in the status quo, but this policy makes them so much worse. And that's our burden today. We're not here to say, there's this other amazing thing you could do. Our job as an opposition is to show you that this policy makes the world now worse than it is today. And that's all we hope we have to show you. Right? Firstly, let's talk about equality. Because right at the start, Brett said in cross-examination, it's all about equality. Every candidate has the same amount of money to spend. And the first issue here came up with incumbents. And Alyssa kind of fluffed this a little bit. She said, well, they don't just get, access to the chest, access to Fort Knox, they don't just get to open it or whatever. Well, of course not, right? But, for instance, George Bush taking a flight out to Iraq or Afghanistan and meeting the troops, right? Is it a state visit? Is it a campaign visit? The truth is, it's probably paid for by the state. And even if he doesn't say, vote for me, the impact that it has is to generate a much greater media profile for him at that point in time. He's to say, I'm with the troops, I'm fighting war on terror. So what we're saying is there are all sorts of non-financial benefits to incumbent presidents. And of course that's true now, but when you prevent other candidates from getting any more money than the president, you automatically give the president more resources than any other possible opposing candidate. And that's why this is unfair, and that's why this prioritises incumbents more than the current system. Secondly, they said, it'll be brilliant. It'll mean corporations have the same amount of power as the little man. And we say, look, of course McCain-Feingold prevents corporations from donating, but in the same way that technically the president can't use state resources, corporations can still subtly and secretly provide all sorts of support for these companies, for these campaigns, right? They can still provide issue ads. They can still provide volunteers. They can still say to their members, oh, we don't like this issue, and it might happen to be the big issue of that candidate's campaign. Because they can still do that. But the key thing here is that much of that won't be directly linked. There won't be a money track. So you can no longer hold that candidate to account when they do push for big oil, when they do push for a reduction in corporation taxes. So there's a reduction in what you know about where your candidate's support and money comes from. At least now you do know where that money comes from, or at least you should do if some members of the media did a slightly better job. Finally, if they really care about equality, they haven't responded to our arguments about who gets engaged. Of course, part of the reason why often they only care about swing states is because of the electoral system. But in that electoral system, if one state is more important and you have a smaller amount of money, you aren't going to care about disenfranchised voters. You aren't going to care about non-swing states, right? And it does cost a lot of money to fly, and it costs even more money when you have to fly with a team of 60 people and pay their salaries and pay all that sort of advertising. So you get an electoral system which focuses on those swing states, doesn't care about 18 to 25s, doesn't care about disenfranchised minorities. And we gave you an example of what happens when money can engage those people at the last election under Obama's campaign, and to a certain extent McCain's campaign as well. Finally, how will politicians behave under this policy? Well, we told you, they're self-interested people. They want to be elected, and they'll do pretty much anything, as we saw with Richard Nixon, to get elected in the first place, right? And that provides even more explanation for why they'll only care about swing states, for why they won't care about those particular groups, and why they will care about the people who do really hold power. And who are they? Well, under this system, you don't have very much money to spend. Well, they said they didn't have much money to spend at the start, and in the end they said, oh, actually, they'll have loads of it, so we're not sure there. But let's assume that their first thing was the thing that they really believed in. When finance is limited, you need free media. You need ways of getting 24-hour news channels to pick up your stories. And the way you do that, as you've all seen over the last few days, is to say horrendous things or get other people, well, allegedly, to say horrendous things about other candidates, as we've seen with the exchange between Mitt Romney and Rick Perry over the past few days. So that's why attack ads become the real currency in elections. And that kind of discourse is the thing which prevents any kind of compromise and leads to the kind of politics, an even worse kind of politics, than we see with the deadlock at the moment in Congress. So for those reasons, we beg you to prevent this happening.